Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. So we've reached the 1980s, which means that it's time for Hong Kong horror films to take the reins of the region. Now our reviews of previous eras have focused very much on Japanese and Filipino horror films. But the 1980s saw a significant increase in the number of Chinese language horror films, while Japan was still making some noteworthy contributions of their own. And that's one of the things that makes this movie review project so interesting, right? We get to see how the different industries ebb and flow in terms of production and overall quality. Now, most fortunately, Hong Kong and Japan gave us a few of the best horror movies of all time during the 1980s, at least in my opinion, a few of which are freaking crazy. If you're a fan of nutty, mind-exploding films like House from 1977, I got a few more films for you that could go toe-to-toe with House in terms of sheer insanity, so get ready. But before we begin, I'd like to briefly discuss the overall state of the Asian film industries during the 1980s. If we consider all genres of film, not just horror, Hong Kong was really churning out the most purely entertaining films of the region during this decade. Although this is most evident within the action and horror genres in particular. Japan was still kind of in their post-classics rut, which they wouldn't really dig out of until the late 1990s. Now don't get me wrong, Japan released some awesome films during the 70s and 80s, which I'm sure to cover in a future series of video reviews. But their best eras of film were the classic era, pre-1970, and the modern era, post-1995. Now, South Korea was still in their pre-New Wave mode, which would change dramatically with their New Wave explosion at the turn of the 21st century. Now, South Korea made some good stuff historically, but their post-1995 filmography completely blows away most of what they made previously, both in terms of variety and overall quality. Now, to be fair, I am catching up on some of the South Korean classics, but what I have seen pales in comparison to what they make today, and I don't even think it's close. Now, in terms of other Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia and the Philippines, I'm less familiar with their output during this era, so I unfortunately cannot offer much of an informed opinion on them. So that's an overall assessment of the region during the 1980s, if we consider all genres of film, just to give you an idea of what was going on. Now, back to our horror project. There are a ton of nutty movies that we're going to cover over this decade. If you're a fan of cult cinema, you should have a ball with this era. If that weren't exciting enough, though, most of these films are at least watchable and moderately entertaining, so I'm going to end up recommending the vast majority of films in the next few videos. But because of the consistency in theme here, for example, Hong Kong sorcery films, which we will cover extensively, especially in this video, you may end up watching a bunch of these oddball flicks if you watch a few initially and really get to enjoy them, get into the subgenres. So I know some people online that just love these cult movies and watch a bunch of them. Now for our purposes here, we will cover 46 Asian horror films from the 1980s in a 3-part video. Now of those 46 films, 20 are Chinese language, mostly from Hong Kong. And as always, titles for all of the movies I discuss are listed in the description box below. So let's get started. And we begin with 6 Chinese language horror films in a row. The first of which is a film called Hex from 1980. Hong Kong horror film. Now, Chi Hung Kwei is the director here. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he directed Ghost Eyes and The Killer Snakes from the 1970s, which we previously covered. Now, he will make some significant contributions to the spellcasting horror subgenre in Hong Kong that hit its peak during the 1980s. So in Hex, this film concerns 3 main characters: an abusive husband, his very sick wife, and their chambermaid. A related murder occurs involving these 3 characters, but the survivors are then haunted by the dead party. Now, after an engaging 40-minute setup, which actually has one neat twist, this movie is weakened a bit by some unimpressive horror sequences, which use irritating character actions, like incessant screaming, peeing pants, if you can believe it, bashing things with clubs, etc. So midway through the film, for example, a group of bumbling idiots are introduced for a limited period of time, but it doesn't help matters because the tone turns hokey and the horror really loses impact. But with that said, the nude possession blood dance ritual is bizarre and interesting enough to put the film on the right track again. Also, one scene near the end is an obvious homage to Quiden from 1964. So this is kind of a lower priority film that should only be viewed after you become a fan of these Hong Kong horror flicks from the early 80s. So this isn't one that I would say you should start with. It's one that you should go back to if you become a fan of this subgenre. Now there are a few other films in this Hex franchise, but I'm going to exclude those from our study here because personally I consider them to be more so comedies and horror films. So I am kind of moderately or marginally recommending Hex for you. Now in terms of DVD availability, it is available on Region 3 DVD in a handful of websites with English subtitles. But remember, you either need an all-region DVD player or like VLC player on your computer to watch that if you were to buy it. So next, we have The Beasts from 1980. A Hong Kong thriller horror hybrid. In this film, a father seeks vengeance from a gang of degenerate hillbilly thugs who raped his daughter and murdered his son. So right off the bat, this seems to be influenced by American nasties of the 70s, such as The Last House on the Left, which is the film that this reminded me of most, and even uses some popular American music during the opening half hour, which is kind of odd. But this is some pretty nasty stuff here. The rape and violence are not quite as explicit as some other more notorious films, but there is a mean-spirited, grimy tone to this that works well. Quite a bit of time is spent with the antagonist here, which creates an odd slasher-style set of sequences during the middle section where the protagonist is the aggressor. So much of this film takes place in a mountain forest and surrounding villages. Just as a side note, not exactly deep stuff here, but this is a sufficiently effective rape revenge film that you might want to seek out if you're into that type of thing. Now, The Beasts is difficult to find, so, it's one of those films, put it on your list if you want to watch it, it'll pop up again. I seem to say that in every video, don't I? But that's really what you gotta do. The next film here is called Corpse Mania from 1981. Still from Hong Kong. Now this film, you could almost consider it a giallo film, like a Hong Kong giallo film. It definitely has some serious influences from those Italian films. And our buddy Chi Hung Kwei is again the director here. So in this film, a detective attempts to find a necrophiliac serial killer who has targeted prostitutes. And again, like I said, this has some similarities to old school Italian giallo films. The antagonist, for example, wears a hat and a mask that covers his face while he consistently murders people. So you get that murder mystery type vibe. It does have a horror-based aesthetic, so sometimes giallo films you could consider to be like murder mystery thrillers with like a slasher vibe to them. Corpse Mania is maybe a little bit more towards the horror aspect there in terms of genre classification. It has some spooky locations and lighting, which are nice. The kills are nicely spaced out, which assists the pacing. There are a few maggot-infested corpses to enjoy, too. You'll see, some of these Hong Kong flicks from the 80s enjoy showcasing maggot-infested corpses, so get ready for that. The first time I watched this, I was a bit disappointed, because with a title like Corpse Mania, you might expect like some just craziness, you know what I mean? But it's not as crazy as you might think with the title Corpse Mania. However, taking the film for what it is after a second viewing, I certainly found myself entertained, so I would recommend this one. Now, Corpse Mania is widely available on DVD, so it's out there for you. Next is a film called Bewitched from 1981. Again, we're in Hong Kong still. And our buddy, Chi Hung Kwei, is again the director here in the spellcasting flick. So a cop travels to Thailand to investigate the murder of a child after her father claims possession as his self-defense in court. So this film actually moves quite slowly, very slowly paced, but there's a lot of time spent on the specific rituals and spellcasting involved in Thai witchcraft, so it's a little different from the Hong Kong stuff. Not a whole lot of gore here or action on display, but one memorable scene involves bubbling skin. You'll see what I'm talking about with that. So viewers interested in this subject matter will find enough to enjoy here, because the spells are very interesting at times. And if you're looking to get into this subgenre of horror, Bewitched is a decent one to start with. You know, maybe a little better than Hex, I would think. Some people online actually really like this one. So Bewitched is available on Region 3 DVD. You know, very similar to Hex in terms of availability. Next, we have Revenge of the Corpse. Revenge of the Corpse. So this is also an alternate title is The Bloodthirsty Dead. Not to be confused with the Bloodthirsty trilogy that we covered from the 70s, which were vampire films from Japan. This film is from 1981, still in Hong Kong. So this film is about a sergeant, his beautiful wife, and a wealthy man in league with an underworld bandit gang. Tragedy strikes, which prompts revenge from beyond the grave. So this is similar to the other Hong Kong ghost films from the same era, but it gets by with its execution. Now, the story is decent enough. From what I remember, the finale is a showdown between the evil spirit and an exorcist. That's pretty good. It's fairly entertaining stuff. I also like the greenish lighting that was used when the corpse haunts. So this isn't really like a spellcasting film. It's kind of like a ghost film, you know, kind of like Ghost Eyes, but this is better than Ghost Eyes was. So I would, you know, moderately recommend this. Revenge of the Corpse is difficult to find, not a high priority item. I'm not really selling it to you big, but you know, put it on your list. Now we come to the first film in this particular video that I actually did not like, believe it or not. And that's called The Devil. The Devil is from 1981, and it's a Hong Kong-Taiwanese co-production. So this schlockfest is about a witch who casts spells on her victims, which turns their insides into snakes and worms. Well, it's a little different than maggots, at least. So these events intersect with the story of a con man who infiltrates the family unit. Starts off fairly well, with some cool gore scenes, and ends off with a decent confrontation, but the story is just very static, it's muddled, and surprisingly unengaging. The violence is also quite unimaginative and repetitive. I mean, a lot of puking worms here. There's a lot of puking worms in this film. If you're into puking worms, I guess you could check it out, but I don't know. I didn't feel like the worms in and of itself were worthy of a viewing. So the overall quality and production values are also really low in this. You know, believe it or not, it's not really a terrible film per se, you know, given some of the positives, but I really think this is a low priority item, and I really would not recommend this. Next is one that's pretty crazy. It's called Mystics in Bali, which is an Indonesian horror film from 1981. So how does this Indonesian horror film stack up to some of the Hong Kong nutty flicks that we just covered? Let's see. Now, a tourist travels to Indonesia with her boyfriend to learn the black magic of the leek cult. I might have pronounced that wrong, but I call it leek. This film certainly offers its share of bizarre, hilarious WTF moments, including animal transformations and flying, blood-sucking witch heads. The leek queen looks like an amalgamation of an old witch, Freddy Krueger, and Yoda. If you could possibly imagine that, don't Google image it. you could just watch the movie and see if you get the same impression that I do about this lady. She likes to laugh a lot, too. Pretty kind of creepy, but kind of goofy at the same time. I'm not joking about this. This is no exaggeration. Reason enough to watch this movie is this witch, man. So the special effects are dated. The dialogue can get pretty bad at times. And you may need to sit through an English dub that's pretty atrocious. But all of those things actually kind of add to the entertainment value. And are somewhat appropriate considering the level of cheesiness on display in this film. So fans of kind of the old school sorcery flicks, well, how many fans are there out there? There's some, but you know, some of my viewers here might be new to this. This might be one to check out, because if you're a fan of this type of film, you would do yourself well to watch this one. The nuttiness level's a bit higher, so it's a bit more memorable than some of the other ones we've been covering. So yeah, I would recommend it. DVD availability is widely available. Mystics in Bali. Hey, feel free to order it. Get it in the mail and go nuts. Now we finally get a very brief break from these nutty cult films. And we move on to a film called Suddenly in Dark Night from 1981, a South Korean horror film. Now a family's life turns horrific when a young hot maid brings home a small statuette that her dead shaman mother used in rituals. Well, that's nice of her, right? Now, much of the focus here is on the wife, who becomes paranoid that her biology professor husband may have an affair with the maid, which would then, of course, consequently push the wife out of the picture of the family. So she's very, how would you call it, paranoid about this, right? So the wife in this film has dreams of the statuette, like it's invading her dreams, and that creeps her out. This film is pretty good. It uses a kaleidoscope effect during a handful of scenes, which I kind of liked, kind of trippy. Nicely shot and atmospheric at times. The acting's pretty good. It is slow-paced, but the finale is lengthy, it's cool, and kind of creepy. I recommend this. Very obscure film, but luckily, Suddenly in Dark Night is available on YouTube with English subtitles. It's on the Korean Film Archive channel. So next, we are back to the nutty films with Curse of Evil, a Hong Kong film from 1982. Now, a once prosperous family, now dysfunctional, deals with an apparent curse that results in death. Now, our buddy Ching Hung Hui is again the director here. It's not his best film, but certainly not his worst, right? Now, the dramatic elements are merely decent, but the horror elements are fun, cheesy stuff. You know, there's some fat, bloody frogs that are pretty cool, and a pink sludge demon. I'm not joking about any of this. It's particularly funny. This is pretty good cult stuff here, people. Again, one of those oddball Hong Kong flicks that isn't a must-watch, so to speak, but it's worth seeking out if you get addicted to the subgenre. And the Curse of Evil. Unfortunately, it's difficult to find. But, hey, if you're into, like, fat, bloody frogs and pink sludge demons, you might want to seek it out. Next film here. It's one that I did not particularly care for. It's called Satan's Slave. Indonesian horror from 1982. Basically, it's about an ancestral curse that comes back to haunt a family. Pretty basic premise. Some online viewers, for some unknown reason, have mentioned that this film was supposed to be an Indonesian take on Don Coscarelli's Phantasm films. You can't be serious about this. I mean, this film is in no way similar to Phantasm. It's also nowhere near as entertaining. The opening 10 minutes has some good atmosphere to start, but afterward there's way too much dull filler to get through, man. Boring dialogue and stupid events. Most of the horror elements are short-lived and weak too. There's not much here to cling to. At least in terms of entertainment value. Again, some online reviewers have given this film credit for employing an Islamic point of view. I mean, it's not like a main theme of the film, but it's kind of peppered in, which is kind of a rarity for films that we get to see in the West, right? I mean, it's an Islamic-based film, but it's not strong enough in this film to really seek it out to see it. It's too low quality, too, to really bother with. However, if you do want some Islamic-themed horror films, check out some of the Dabe films from Turkey instead. And that director, I have difficulty pronouncing his name, so I'm not going to even try, but the director of the Dabe films has also done a few other Turkish horror films that are pretty good. So, you know, if you want some Islamic horror, check him out. Oh, man. Next film here. It's time to get crazy, people. We've reached what is arguably my favorite Asian horror film from the 1980s, and that's The Boxers Omen from 1983, a Hong Kong horror film. Our buddy, Chi Hoon Kwai, is again the director here. This video is practically a Chi Hoon Kwai filmography review, and this one is his most purely entertaining film. I love this movie. Very, very insane cult stuff here. So the plot here is fantastic. It's one of the best plots ever. A boxer becomes a monk to destroy a clan of evil wizards. So from what I remember, our protagonist is just a normal dude, right? And he begins puking live eels for no apparent reason. So something's wrong. However, after seeking the advice of some monks, he learns that in a previous life he had a twin brother. A brother whose reincarnated soul was recently cursed by an evil wizard. And because of that, our protagonist was also cursed, due to their link from a previous life. Really interesting story, right? And it's really interesting stuff. And that's one of the reasons why this film is so friggin' entertaining. I mean, it's basically a cult film that is significantly upgraded by some truly legitimate filmmaking qualities. So, for example, the set designs are phenomenal in this film. Especially during the latter half, you get to see some Buddhist temples and wizard dens that are gorgeous. And I think some of them are like real buildings in real life. Like some of the most gorgeous architecture you will ever see in a movie. I mean, who let these guys film here? I mean, how did these guys get permission to film in these amazing temples? It's like, hey, we got this Boxers Omen flick. It's about some nutty boxer who becomes a monk and battles evil witches and wizards. Like, yeah, sure, you could use our temple. I mean, really? But it's fantastic, man. Some of these temples are great. And, you know, since the emphasis here is on Buddhism and spellcasting, much of the film consists of very elaborate religious ceremonies and curse rituals that are very interesting to watch. Some excellent scenes involving various animals, too. Now, the physical effects are low budget, but totally entertaining. It's no understatement to say that this film contributes some of the most memorable, crazy, hilarious WTF moments humanly imaginable. For a non-stop exhibition in witchcraft, general weirdness, and cheesy cool effects, this is completely nuts. It's like no other film you will ever see for the rest of your life. The only thing that may put the viewer off to this is that I suspect that a few of the animals in this film were actually real instead of props. Like, I remember a snake and a chicken possibly getting executed on screen. So, you know, if that really bothers you a lot, you may want to skip that. Most of the animals in this film, though, are so obviously fake. It's hilarious. You know, so some of the ones that looked kind of real, I'm not really sure, but just something to look out for. But I absolutely love this movie. I could watch this movie every week for the rest of my life. So The Boxers Omen is widely available on DVD too, so there's no excuse not to watch it unless you're queasy on the, you know, the animal stuff in there. It was a snake and a chicken, but still. So next, I mean, how do you follow up The Boxers Omen? But we've come to a calamity, a total calamity here in our review series. It's a Calamity of Snakes from 1983, a Hong Kong Taiwanese horror film. Man, with this title, this better be good, and it is. So after their kin is brutally murdered by construction workers, a local snake community gets really pissed off and seeks vengeance. Very easy to root for the snakes in this movie, especially after the opening scene, and the viewer will surely enjoy watching those scumbag humans get what they deserve. Now, the script and the dialogue in this film is fairly weak, as you would suspect from a film called Calamity of Snakes. It does provoke a lot of unintentional laughter, though. And we're talking an endless barrage of gut-busting hilarity here. Very funny stuff. And as if all of this weren't great enough entertainment, there are a number of genuinely classic moments herein. For example, some badass mongooses, a warehouse slugfest, and an 80s dance party, which is no doubt from the 1980s. Now, again, full disclosure here. Hundreds of live snakes get slaughtered on screen in this film. I think that's mostly during the beginning. This is way worse if you're an animal lover than the Boxers Omen. I think most people can easily sit through the Boxers Omen, even though there are a few little gross out moments in there. But Calamity Snakes, if you're a fan of snakes, it's kind of too bad that they actually killed hundreds of live snakes to make this film. If you don't want to sit through that, you may want to skip it, but everyone else should probably watch it. So DVD availability of Calamity of Snakes is widely available. So the current DVD that I got, though, it has a fairly poor visual audio quality and has an atrocious English dub, but hey, make that decision yourself. And some of these Hong Kong films, had even some of their action films had some questionable morals in terms of how they were made. And, just one of those things of the industry. If you don't want to support it, you definitely don't have to. Next film, Seeding of a Ghost, from 1983. This is a Hong Kong horror film. So after accidentally interrupting an act of black magic, a man and his wife are plagued by bad fortune. The premise is set up early on with some hijinks and fisticuffs, but things get more interesting at around the 40-minute mark, when black magic is used for vengeance, as well as in defense of the antagonists. The really crazy stuff is left for kind of the final half hour, and it is well worth the wait, despite only limited use of gore. It's just the bizarreness of it that really comes through. Quite a bit of nudity on display as well, which is common for these Hong Kong spellcasting films, believe it or not. Some online reviewers really love this flick. I think it's a moderately high priority, I think. Kind of hard to judge priorities in this video, right? Because I'm recommending a lot of the films, but I'm trying to give you an idea of which ones to put higher than others. Seeding of a Ghost is a notch above some of the previous ones. Now, Seeding of a Ghost is widely available on DVD, so we're having some luck here in availability. Now, finally here, we come to a film called Red Spell Spells Red. A Hong Kong horror film from 1983. So in this film, a TV producer and his sexy assistant go to Malaysia to shoot a special feature about a wicked dwarf who practiced evil magic. It's worth the travel, I'm sure. After being killed by 4 righteous sorcerers, however, he casts a spell to curse all of those who enter his grave. So, at this point in this video, you should have a pretty good idea of what to expect from these Hong Kong sorcery films. Red Spell Spells Red is not quite as crazy as the best Hong Kong sorcery films out there, like the Boxers Omen, but it does have its fair share of bizarre scenes involving spell casting, death traps, and body ailments, right? Full disclosure again. There is some pig, chicken, and scorpion slaughter that's on screen. So, I'm just telling you, I try to warn you about these things. Now, DVD availability of Red Spells Red is that it's available on YouTube for viewing. So that's good. DVD is a little bit difficult to find, but check it out on YouTube. So man, we hit the ground running on Asian horror from the 1980s, didn't we? I'm almost exhausted from talking about these crazy Hong Kong sorcery flicks, and we're only getting started. We have 2 more videos to go before we tackle the decade. Now, if you're not particularly interested in this subgenre of Hong Kong horror, don't worry, because part 2 of our exploration of the 1980s will have more films from Japan, so make sure you look out for that. So, until next time, we'll see you next time.